Here we are. A wonderful good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or good night, depending on where you are on this beautiful panel. Welcome to another episode of Implication of Exponential Technologies. Today with Karim from Culture Design, and we are going to explore curiosity and creativity as a leverage for technological innovation, adaptation, advancement, whatever the word is that we need to focus on here. That's what we're going to figure out. Karim, thanks for joining me today, and happy to have you aboard here. I want to start with a easy, difficult question in the beginning, and that's why do we talk about curiosity and creativity in the context of exponential technologies? Why are they important?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me, first of all, Robin, and Epps University. Um, I think curiosity is a key, right? If you're not curious about anything, it's going to be difficult to be part of the future we are heading of. Things are changing faster and faster, so you need to figure like what are you curious about, and how can your curiosity lead you to also use all these tools that will be available. Because if you're not showing any curiosity at all, it's going to be very difficult for you in the future. And the creativity part then plays in the role of how to use the different tools for your own products and your own advantages and services.
Before we talk about a little bit like how you can get more curious, how you can be getting more creative, I know you're a mastermind of that, and this short episode that we're having here today probably won't cover everything of that. But before we do that, just like a question a little bit in a different direction in terms of like technology. So when we look at a lot of like this typical mainstream technologies right now, it's AI, it has been blockchain in the past, it will be probably quantum in the future. So like if we just look at like a little bit like this technology buzzwords, this mainstream perception of them, how would you see this like from an importance perspective to actually understand this, to like really be cutting through the noise and finding something that that is important there? Because the way I'm quite often looking at it is like technologies are being developed, they are out there, they're enabling us to do all kind of cool things, but we have to actually figure out what these cool things are. So how do you think we can be more curious about these technologies even when there's like quite a lot of noise and a lot of buzz around us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to not completely get drowned in all the things that are available, because we're heading in a world where everything will be available probably, right? If you have everything constantly available, one of the difficult parts would be to make a decision, right? If you go to a discounter and buy food, you have two different versions of milk and you can make a faster decision than if you go to a supermarket with, I don't know, 10 different versions of milk and you don't make any decision because you have too many choices. So I think it's also about being clear about how do you make decisions. So I think that the decision-making process is something we don't reflect enough about. Are you clear about how you're making decisions? Are they intuitional? Are you more rational decisions? Are you spending a lot of time on them? And if you can help figure that out, I think it will be very important for making decisions in a world where you have too many decisions to make.
So when we're looking at this decision making, like this is a really interesting point. So there's like studies out there that demonstrate, right, that we're taking significantly more decisions on a daily basis compared to 100 years ago, or even just like 50 years ago, mainly driven through the availability of information and this constant inflow of, for example, notifications, messages. It has never been easier to share also information, which is good and bad to a certain degree. And you mentioned this perspective of overwhelm, right? That it's just like, hey, how do I actually come to this decision? Do you have any ideas or like any tips on how to address this issue, especially when you are curious, right? Because like, you could also then argue on the other side, don't get distracted, or are you getting distracted through all of this? Is probably curiosity then also like a bad thing because you're getting too distracted due to all this information?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are 2 points, the different forms of curiosity. But before we coming to that, as you also mentioned, like 100 years ago, maybe there was a time, like, I don't know how long ago, that people made 3,000 decisions their whole life. And today you make roughly 3,000 decisions per day. If you make so many decisions, you open up your smartphone, you decide on which app you click on, right? Do you go on the website, you click on that text and so on. all these little decisions take a lot of energy. And I think it's very important to be clear, where do you want to spend time on to make decisions? Because the small decisions, they take too much of your energy, so you want to outsource them and rather focus on 3 important decisions per day that you can really focus on. What are decisions that will move the needle for the work I'm actually working on at the moment? And then on curiosity, it's about deep, narrow curiosity where you have built your expertise in, for example, I don't know, ping pong or machine learning, you have built your expertise in, or cooking. And then you have like broad curiosity where you're curious about anything, right? If you look at children, they go on YouTube and they click on everything every time. So you want to really focus on where is your deep curiosity and when do you spend time on broad curiosity, so you make decisions that are actually relevant to getting you to a new creative idea. Because when you have built an expertise and then you connect with something new, that's usually where the creative innovations or creative ideas happen, right? You're connecting 2 or 3 things with each other.
Yeah, beautiful. So I think now we're coming already in like some kind of like a framing of what is the importance behind it, how are things interconnected, why, or how does curiosity also lead to creativity? You just like touched up on that really, really briefly right now. So let's probably start with the curiosity part here, like saying like build your field of expertise. So I would say this is probably something really relevant, especially for people that are probably also watching this episode right now, that are probably also in an academic context, that are dealing a lot with learning, that are dealing a lot with how can we actually empower people around these kind of things. So you mentioned like find your level of, or like find your area of expertise where you put like your deep curiosity in there. How do I find this? Is this something that comes around the corner and says, hello, here I am? Or do I need to work on that? Is this something that I'm interested in? Is this coming from the internet? What is like strategies that you would recommend here to deal with that?
I mean, there are 2 thoughts on that. First of all, it's really about finding the different areas of deep curiosity, because you can be an expert in ping pong and then in machine learning, right? And cooking at the same time. So you rather build different blocks of deep curiosity, and then you have more potential to connect them with each other, and also with broader curiosity topics which have nothing to do with it, right? Like you go to your hairdresser and he shows you different techniques of how he's using the scissor. It's so far away from your expertise on ping pong but then there's a moment where it makes click and you're like, oh wow, when I use the scissor that way, maybe I could also hold the table tennis in a different way. It's just little things that influence the way you become more curious about things you've already built curiosity about. The second thing is deep curiosity depends. It starts with when you're a baby, right? If you're like 9 or 10, 11 months old, one sign of high curiosity in babies, or when they show curiosity, is with finger pointing, when they point their finger towards objects. Then the environment have 2 options. Give the baby the object, for example, they're showing towards a glass. So you give them the glass and say, this is a glass. And if you continue doing that, the baby will point more fingers in different directions and will get more curious. If you don't do that, the baby will stop pointing their finger when you're around. So you kill their creativity, and then they ask around 40,000 questions. Why questions and how between 2 and 5 years old? Again, you have parents and teachers who say, don't ask so much, or that's a stupid question. Or you have parents who tell, like helicopter parents, who give them every answer. And then you have like the parents of innovators and Nobel Prize winners, not all of them, some of them, they will answer 70 to 80% of the questions, but 20% of the questions they will ask back and say, what do you think? So they really promote observation making. And observation making is a skill that is usually started way earlier, because when you start to observe things, you build your compass for your own curiosity. So that's another level. You can always start later on with your curiosity if you haven't had the privilege of having that kind of environment, right? By asking a question like, what questions do you currently have? And that again depends on the environment. If you have an environment that doesn't support your question making because you don't feel safe enough, it will be more difficult to figure out your curiosity. So you need an environment where stupid questions or naive questions are actually allowed.
I absolutely love this this explanation that you're giving here, and like probably putting this also in our technology context. We're thinking about like the baby now finger pointing at different kind of objects, and then something happens or nothing happens. I think we can see like similar patterns in large organizations when it comes also to technology. So especially when we're looking into the hype topics, and I'm just like picking our daily interaction now with AI. So like we hear the term AI all the time, and it also feels like a little bit like that, right? Like people are finger pointing at certain kind of things, and quite often there's no reaction whatsoever to that. There's like blockages, there's like all different kind of barriers in the ways some other organizations are reacting like to this finger pointing and providing some kind of things. And then there are others that are doing exactly the last part that you were mentioning. They are asking back to the people like, hey, look at the things and think about what you actually can think. I think it's also like really from an organizational design perspective an interesting approach, because what I personally see as something that works quite well is that if you have like a board or a C-level that provides like the field on which you can play, but then openly encourages these people to play something on there, whatever that is, to experiment, to ask these questions, saying like, hey, I'm providing you from like a C-level perspective or a governance perspective. I provide you a skeleton to deal in this case with artificial intelligence, but I'm not telling you exactly what you're going to do, but you're going to figure that out yourself. And a lot of organizations that embrace that, or really have like this, define the rules, define the playground, define the governance, to keep it in corporate language, and then invite people to think about what's happening there. That there's quite a lot of exciting and cool use cases that are emerging out of that. And I think it's like a really good perspective onto that. You mentioned, Karim, that some children then basically unlearn to be curious, if I put it like that, or like lose this curiosity because they're getting either this reaction or not getting invited into that. I think we can also see this quite often in an organizational environment. Let's assume we are in this position. So how can we basically reignite our curiosity? How can we practice, train, and engage more with that we are getting actually way more curious again in things around us that are then falling probably also in the category of broad curiosity?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I really like your points about the corporate environment on that. I think there are two things. When children ask like 40,000 why questions on average between 2 and 5, it's natural that they will ask less questions when they're getting older because they've understood the environment more and more. But still, some will ask more questions than others. And then if you go to an organizational structure, the company culture plays a huge role, right? If in some organizations, they actually encourage you to ask questions all the time, where they say, hey, if you see somebody doing a mistake, just shout out loud and tell that to anyone. But that's like, but for that kind of company culture, you need people who are fine to get criticized or who get questions that are uncomfortable. So you need to write down the way you're working with each other. That's what I understand under culture, to people, even on your website. Like some of the coolest startups I've seen, they're writing down the whole company culture on their website, like every part of it. So when you apply for that company, you know what kind of organization you're actually entering. But most of the times, the play rules, the way we work with it, they're not written down anywhere. So if you go play soccer, you know the rules, right? Your goal is to make a goal. If you go outside, you have to use the ball in a different way. But the way we work, it's not written down. And a lot of time, if it's written down, it's not lived. So there's no coherence between what is written down and what is lived, leading to survival emotions because you feel incoherence. So you want to really create an environment where it's clear how we work. And when that is clear, you can really engage then in curiosity because you feel more safe about the rules. So you know, oh, it's actually supported to ask questions. And asking questions again, that can lead to it getting back to your curiosity. And I want to add one more thing. There's like a curiosity zone where you get into the curiosity zone when you build up a level of knowledge. Because if you don't have any knowledge, there's no curiosity about a new topic. But once you learn a few things, suddenly also your curiosity can go up. But here comes a part where a lot of people leave the curiosity zone because once you've built your expertise over 10 or 20 years, about, for example, social media marketing. Okay, that's probably only 10 years old. If you build your expertise there, and at some point you think you know everything, that's the moment where you leave the curiosity zone and go into overconfidence. So you think you know everything, and then you become a little bit arrogant as well. But the people who are highly innovative, they're the ones who are, even if they have built expertise over 10, 20, 30 years, they still ask questions with a beginner's mindset. And if you have left that curiosity zone, the best way to get back is to ask questions and be a little bit humble. And that's where you find the differentiation of top innovative players and the not so good ones.
So to bring it to like the simple strategy probably that can be applied every day is to use more question marks in your sentences overall.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean,
love that.
if you're looking at the AI age, right? People are using prompts. So the level of questioning will become important. How do you ask questions? Like, I'm going to give you an example. I think in 1943 there was a young girl. She asked a question like to her dad. It was not a question. It was more like a sense. I want to see the picture now. And the dad said, I cannot show you the picture. We have to send it to the photo lab. It has to be developed. It will take a few weeks. But why? She asked. And the dad was like, yeah, why actually? And that why question led to 1948, where the first instant camera was developed, and the name of the company was Polaroid. So the first Polaroid Polaroid camera was developed through a why question, and the dad used a why question to ask, like, yeah, why not? And then the why went to a what if question of what if we would have the darkroom inside a camera. And that what if question took a while to went to a how question of how can we actually make that actually possible. So this is like a framework from Warren Berger, where you have the why, what if, and how question. And the more why questions you ask, you get to a room of questions you wouldn't have thought about. But a lot of times you have managers who start with the how questions. How do we make this more effective? How do we get more clients? But those questions are not leading to real breakthroughs. So by following more the why, what if, how, that's where you can really get to the juicy stuff.
Oh, I love that. So I mean, this is like a really practical framework as well, which I think is it's also like the cool part, right? Because like all I hear from you, and now knowing also like, I mean, we have just like 50 minutes and conversation around that, but like knowing also like more of your topics, like most of this strategies that you can actually embrace are really easy to execute. I think it's like sometimes really hard to have like this cue always in your head that points you to like, instead of asking like this, how do we apply this? Yeah, more to like this what if and why question. And I think like what you're mentioning is extremely relevant in an organizational context. And I think the main problem to that is it's quite often the way we are measuring performance outcomes in an organization, because they are always leading to this how question, not necessarily to the process that that brings us there. So we're pretty good in most organizations to measure outcomes and outputs, but we are really bad with taking actually the measures if an input and an action was actually useful for the process to get there. And with a higher level of uncertainty and also ambiguity in what we can actually do with these technologies,
Right.
this input and actions part becomes so much more important, because like we see this now every day basically happening, right? When we're looking into let's look just into AI again. So like there's ChatGPT came out, created like this massive hype that we're still seeing, and people were constantly asking, yeah, how can I use this now for new business models? How can I use this now for personal productivity? How can I use this for everyday interactions, whatever? So it was like really this focus on trying to find a solution without actually looking into what do I want to achieve, what kind of impact do I hope, or what kind of benefits do I hope to get out of that, what kind of change do I want to see, because then defining like this process becomes much more easy. And ultimately you can also come to what you're saying, right? It's like you're creating these better outcomes that are then also on the bottom line much better compared to just starting there. So I think that's a really good good framework. And I think like the call here, at least from my perspective, would be for organizations to rethink to a certain degree how they are steering their organizations on these measurements, because only output and outcome driven will take out all this creative part and this curiosity part to a certain degree as well, because we are only looking for the solution and the immediate results rather than the long-term impact that we might want to achieve.
Yeah.
Karim,
Yeah.
no, go.
I think it's just one thing that you also said a few years ago, that are we working on the right question? Because you can build the perfect process, but if you've worked on the wrong questions, then you spend a lot of time and resources and money just not working on the right questions. So I think it's about increasing quantity of questions, because that will also lead to quality. But you have to increase both. You have to increase quantity of more asking questions, but also the quality. How do you ask questions? How is your questioning? And then that can lead to what you said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like what you just mentioned with the Polaroid camera is like the best confirmation there, because it was not about like the time per se. I'm just like abstracting that now without being a camera engineer. So if I'm now doing something completely wrong here, please forgive world out there, right? But it's like not about like, it's not about like I want to have this picture right now as the core problem. That's again the output. But the problem statement here more is like looking at what you mentioned. I need to have like the development capacity built in the camera to actually create this visual here, and that's a completely different perspective on saying like, hey, can I bring this development capacity into a camera compared to can I create a picture right now out of that? One follows the others, and like really looking at these principal problem statements, I think is like really really important to break it down. So like, what do we need to solve first in order to achieve that? And I think, Karim, this is also probably a good bridge to leave one C behind, the curiosity one, and keeping this a little bit in mind, and use the last couple of minutes to talk more about creativity. You mentioned this also earlier, and I think we're at the perfect point in the discussion to talk about this, connecting certain areas. So now we're probably looking at, hey, we have increased our curiosity, we're asking better questions, we're changing a little bit our approach. But now how do we create actually something? How can we be creative with the things that we have available at our hands to come up with something? What are your observations there in terms of creativity?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a few levels to answer those questions, because I can go very deep and keep it broad. But I want to start with another story on that. If you look at one of the breakthroughs, or the breakthrough at the company Nike, from Bill Bowerman, he was like an athletic coach at the University of Oregon, 60s, 70s, something like that. He was highly passionate about running and making his runners faster. So that was where his deep curiosity was built around, right? Around running. And one day he was sitting with his wife having breakfast, and they were making waffles together. And when the waffle maker was open, he saw like, wait a minute, what if I take the inside of the waffle maker and put it underneath the shoes, where the first Nike shoe, the Nike waffle trainer, was actually developed, that lead to breakthroughs in running for his runners. So it was a connection making. And I think connection making is something we can actively work on to develop. So for example, if I ask you what else can you do with a glass, yeah, you can drink out of it, you can put flowers in it, you can use it as a hat. So the average person can come up to 7 to 8, 9 answers per minute. Like the top creatives, and sometimes those kids, before they go to school, they come to over 20 answers. And when you practice connection making practices like that, you can increase your association making ability up to 3 times. Because when you have more association making ability available through problems you're solving, you have more potential solutions. So creativity for me is really a big part of it, or big chunk of it, is to practice your association making ability. Because then you really start to observe the reality you're walking in, but you have like augmented reality glasses. You walk through the room, but most people will see only one function of an object, like a glass. But now that you've practiced your creativity, you see more functions of the same object. You can even connect things, because you see a glass, oh, I could put the flowers in. Or you see the shoes and think, oh, that's where I can also put my socks in, for example. Like you just look at more layers of the same objects.
This layering approach is I find this really fascinating, because we are in a like sometimes it feels that we design things with one purpose in mind and then just try to stick with this particular purpose, and then not trying to break up what we can actually do with that. And I think this is also something that applies quite often in this whole technology this discussion, without now going too deep into that, but just like to put it into the room, if you think about like technologies that sometimes that have big fan communities, and then on the other side like big skeptics, for example in the whole blockchain world, where some people say like this is the technology of the future, and others say like this is the most or like the most useless technology stack that we have ever created. So there's like this two kind of the extremes, but there's like the discussions in both camps are quite narrow in what their argumentation points are coming from, like one purpose of the technology, and not like breaking it up more up and saying like, hey, what can we actually achieve with that, what other kinds are out there. And I think like, again, if we're thinking more about like this why and what if questions, also from a technology perspective, we can first of all look more at it from a curiosity perspective, but then also try to connect certain challenges that we have out there. And I think in general it applies to everything we have with technology, right? The technology has like some kind of like a technological driven purpose that has been defined by the creators to a certain degree, but it doesn't have any meaning yet. So the meaning part, and like saying like what do we actually do out of that, is coming from like this curiosity part, and then this layering part of saying like what could be like the new purpose or additional purposes of this technology. And I think that's where the creativity part is like such an important thing. And you mentioned the waffle maker. I think that's a great one, right? Where you just like use a pattern of something for something else, or you take something as it is and think about it in different kinds of shapes. And as more and more technologies are getting more and more universally usable, just think about ChatGPT. Thinking back 2 years, it was like an okayish homework writer, and now you can build all different kind of things out of that. But at the core, it's still a technology that is run on a large language model in this case. So I really like this perspective. Karim, we have an audience question that I want to pull in before we close the session, and this is from Daniel. And he was asking, it was actually when we were talking about this questions around curiosity. He's asking, is there a way to score questions as to finding the relevant ones to go deeper on? And this question I find really great. What's your point on this, Karim? I have one.
I do want to say one more thing before going into that question. Would that be fine?
Sure,
Just
absolutely.
the creativity part. I think one thing on practicing creativity is the connection making, right? But the other part, which is even more relevant, is the input. Where do you get your input? If you hang out with the same people, read the same things, do the same thing every day, the quality of information that's inside available your brain is quite limited, right? But if you look at someone like Da Vinci, who spent time with totally different industries, different people, different things, you gather way more diverse information. So I think input is something personal for a lot of people, right? But it's a crucial part. We should not forget that input part, which is very crucial for having the ground base, so the connections can be happening on a subconscious level sometimes. To the question of Daniel, I would be actually interested to hear your answer first, and then
happy to do so. It's like the way I would look at it, I think like the scoring is kind of hard. I think I would always look more at like the breakdown of questions and the formulation aspects of questions, and there's like this fine line between going too deep and too narrow and being too broad or too superficial. So it's, to a certain degree, it's also an art. But what I really like with questions, and I mean it's probably the bad advice, but it's actually good advice, is like to ask more questions about questions. And the one that I'm referring to here is the why question, because the why question gives you more space to think about what you have actually written down before, and then you can break it down into more foundation labor. And this is what we then normally call like the first principle, or the principle problem statement, or principle questions. That is like the basic for the basis. And obviously here you can also go like way too deep, right? Because again, it's like, oh, why are clouds forming as they do? Yes, you can do this as a research question, but if you are thinking about, I don't know. Also, I'm not an airplane engineer, but if you're thinking about making better airplanes and you want to work on clouds, probably you are not going to work on something that is influencing the weather. Or maybe you are, but it's like a little bit like, are you really now in this cloud business or not, or are you more in the business of aviation? So I think like finding this fine line where it's like, this is something that is broad enough to give me opportunities to work with, but also at the same time it's focused enough to not completely being ambiguous or like uncertain about what actually we are working on. And I think another point just to enrich that is to really define working assumptions and think about the impact we want to achieve with that. And I'm not talking here about like everything the world will end with, but just like having an understanding of what do we actually want to see happening in the world. And if we stick with your Polaroid camera example, it's just like saying like, we're doing this to work on instant images or near instant images. So that's the impact we want to see, because we want to have people happy with their real-time memories, whatever. So that's what we're working on. So it is narrow enough to focus still on the camera, but it is broad enough to also leave the path of the camera eventually if a pivot point makes sense throughout this process. So I wouldn't score, but rather see like, is it broad enough? Is it narrow enough? And play a little bit with that and figure out in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you answered the question better than I ever could do. So I would like to leave it like that, but I would add one more thing. I think sometimes when you start with a why question, right, it's not stopping with one why. You can go deeper and deeper, right? You suddenly ask 4 or 5 why questions about, and you go deeper and deeper, and suddenly you're discovering opportunities you wouldn't have thought about, right? Like you want to build a car, and then suddenly one question is like, why do we actually drive car? Why do we drive? And then you answer the question, and it goes deeper and deeper. Well, maybe there's another way to go from A to B, or even you don't have to go from A to B. I don't know. And then you develop remote work and all of that in virtual reality. So I think being open sometimes, and this is the broad curiosity aspect. Are you open to the questions leading you to areas you wouldn't have thought about? Because you can stay very focused on the area you're working on, but sometimes to be open, that's maybe sometimes the place where the real breakthroughs can happen. So you need some flexibility and time resource for that, because it's a crucial part, because that question will lead the direction of whatever you're working on.
Yeah, absolutely agreeing on that part. So, Karen, we are already half an hour in. Thank you so much for participating. As with every one of those episodes, the last comments are for you. So, if there's anything that you would say we have forgot to talk about, anything that you need to put into this room, feel free to do now. Otherwise, I can only say thank you so much, Karen, for spending this last 30 minutes with me. It was really interesting. I would love to continue this also at one point, because there was like so many other aspects that I would like find really, really interesting to dive into. So thank you for your time, and final words for you, Karim.
Thank you, Robin and EBS University, for having me. Really enjoyed the discussion. I think we talked about most things. I think for the creativity part, the input is something that I hope you have as a takeaway, to really think about where do you get your input. Like, where is your information resources? It can be news, newspapers. What are they? Are they quality stuff that you're getting in? Like, if you're like a professional athlete, you also look like what kind of food you're putting into your body, right? But if you're a professional worker and you have to create stuff, you also have to think about where do you get your input. Because if it's superficial stuff, or loaded with negative emotions a lot of times, or anger and fear, the information you're getting, it can have an impact on the quality of work you're working on. I'm not saying to not listen to those things. They're important about broad curiosity, but are you clear about where you get your input?
This is a fabulous last statement. Thank you so much, Karim, and have a wonderful rest of the day.